could you describe your work as a prison guard in North Korea in sort of the broad terms of your story?
저는 북한에 있을 때
I served for 8 years as a guard of a political prison camp under the Ministry of State Security. I guarded 4 prison camps in total. The reason why I defected is my father's suicide while I was still serving as a guard. When my father got a little bit drunk and complained about the food distribution system in North Korea, he was taken into questioning by the state security. And eventually he committed suicide during the process. And in North Korea, because of collective punishment, the families are also arrested and imprisoned in the political prison camp. Over one night, my status changed from a guard to a prisoner. And only then did I realize why the prisoners I used to guard got arrested in the first place. Because I knew so well the system of the political prison camps, I decided I couldn't stay in there. With 2 other prisoners, we decided to defect, but only I made it alive to South Korea.
During your time here working in these political prison camps, what kind of human rights abuses did you witness?
많이 있었는데요. 대표적으로
There were a lot of cases. The most representative case would be public executions. It would happen on a regular basis each year. But there were also irregular public executions. Over the 8 years, I witnessed over 20 public executions. I wasn't the one to shoot, but I was still there to control the prisoners. Beatings happened on a daily basis. From the start, the guards are taught to believe that the prisoners are traitors who disobeyed the Kim family, that they are less than beasts. We didn't feel any pity towards them. There are countless cases of prisoners beaten to death or bitten to death by dogs.
And I also know, because we've spoken earlier, you have a story about which kind of encapsulates this, how they were viewed as animals, as beasts, or less than that, where I believe you were practicing a Bruce Lee kick on a prisoner. Could you briefly tell us that story?
This movie wasn't shown to the public. It was only shown to people who trained in martial arts like the soldiers for educational purposes. The movie was a Hong Kong movie from the 70s, translated to the fight between the dragon and the tiger in North Korea. We learned a lot of the moves in the movies. For example, roundhouse kicks or flying kicks, and we would practice these moves on the prisoners. It wasn't like we would line up the prisoners and practice on them. We would do it randomly when we were monitoring the work fields. We picked on the prisoners for the slightest mistakes and practiced the moves. It was a popular practice among the soldiers.
Okay, and now you're defected to South Korea. You run an organization, NK Watch, to keep an eye on human rights abuses in North Korea. Based on your work with this organization, how do you view the current situations for human rights in North Korea?
Since 2012, our organization, the North Korea Watch, has been monitoring North Korea through official mechanism of the United Nations on issues such as confinement, missing cases, sexual discrimination, child abuse, treatment of the disabled, and forced labor. We submitted over 800 cases to the United Nations.
Can he say where does he see the big violation, the ones that, yeah, where in the country is the big human rights violations?
I can't define a specific area, but as for punishment of high officials, it would be Pyongyang because it's where they all live. Punishment of the general public would be most frequent in the border cities near China, Hamgyongdo, Jagangdo, and Yanggangdo.
The international community is making a difference. Is North Korea's economic situation making a difference? Meaning, when the country is suffering economically, is the human rights abuses increasing? Are we seeing more public executions? Are we seeing more beatings? Are we seeing more violence against women, against disabled people? Like, when the country is under economic stress, is the human rights abuses going up?
Human rights violation is related to political and economic reasons. The food distribution system is already destroyed. People are dying of hunger. Before COVID, there used to be people who crossed the Chinese border to do business and bring goods back to North Korea. Now China completely sealed off their border. This means that supply from the outside is totally cut off and supply from within is also very limited. I hear stories that people are dying of hunger like they did in the Great Famine of the 90s. We will get the specifics in the near future, but the biggest problem is the violation of the people's right to live. Support from the outside is cut off, and people can't bring basic goods like rice from China. People are suffering in North Korea. I heard that the soldiers are told to shoot on the spot if anybody approaches the border. People can't even go near Duman Gang or Aprok Gang. And historically, North Korea has always held more public executions in times of financial difficulty. We don't have official reports yet because of COVID, but I am sure that there are harsher punishments and more public executions.
Economic situation, as he says, public executions, for example, has always increased. So when the international community is putting sanctions on North Korea, that undoubtedly also helps or creates economic pressure on North Korea. Is that in turn increasing human rights violations inside North Korea?
There are defectors who keep in contact with their family in North Korea. They are saying that right now situations are even more difficult than the Great Famine in the 90s. There are people dying of hunger. But situations are a bit different from the past because whereas the past people didn't know of the outside world and depended solely on the distribution of the government, now people are trying their best to survive. In other words, although the situation is harsher, they know how to survive better than they did in the past. The people have changed since the 90s. There have been a lot of sanctions regarding North Korea's nuclear provocation. And it's true that the sanctions hurt the people when it's supposed to hurt the Kim regime. The problem is that China is supporting the regime so that it won't fail. China is the reason why the Kim regime still stands. If the US pressures China to stop the Chinese government from providing support to the Kim regime, I predict that the regime will fall within 2 or 3 years. Without controlling China, sanctions wouldn't make that much of a difference.
Mr. Ahn, thank you very, very much for your time and for your great answers once again.